share the recording.
All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to this MBA Club event. This is an event on early career negotiation, and we are lucky enough to have our guest, Professor Molly Kern, who is an award-winning tenured professor and organizational psychologist here at Baruch College, whose research focuses on negotiation and decision-making, group dynamics, and ethical leadership and behavior. Her work has appeared in top academic and popular publications such as the Harvard Business Review, Psychological Science, Forbes, and Vanity Fair. She is the recipient of multiple prestigious awards, both for her research and her teaching, including the Abraham J. Breloff Prize in Ethics, the Baruch College Presidential Excellence Award in Teaching, and the Outstanding Faculty Teaching Award at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. Her first book, Negotiating at Home, Essential Steps for Reaching Agreement with Your Kids, was published in June of 2020, and today she has generously agreed to talk to us about early career negotiation strategies. Welcome, Professor Kern.
Oh, thank you. I always forget what keeps me busy during my days. So let me tell you a little bit more about my background so you have a sense of where I'm coming from. I am a full-time professor. This is my thing. And as a full-time professor, when I'm not teaching, I'm leading an area in my department, as we were talking about a minute ago, but I'm also doing a lot of research and I'm doing consulting. So my research is eclectic, but a lot of it over the last 20 years has been on negotiation. And that was informed by what I did before I became a professor. So before joining academia, I worked for Deloitte, and I worked for Deloitte first in the audit and advisory assurance services area, which was called something very different way back then, but then went into a college recruiting and global recruiting strategist role. So I was a recruiter five years, hiring MBA and undergraduates, primarily accounting and finance majors, into the firm, both within New York, Chicago, Detroit, and also globally. So today, I'm speaking to you very much from an evidence-based research perspective that draws from 100 years of research, but I'm also speaking to you from this very real, I used to recruit y'all, and it hasn't changed that much. And so my thoughts are not to tell you things, share ideas with you that you can find in the wealth of resources, which I'm happy to share my favorites, but I'm not going to repeat what you could find easily on the internet, but share things that you might not see or glean easily from the internet, and do that in about 25-ish minutes, and then leave it open to you for questions, because your questions are really what are most important. And if any of you has a single question, I'm sure all of you have had that question at some point in time. So as I'm talking, please take notes, think about what questions you have, because those will guide the second half of our time together this afternoon. Is that okay? Cool. Okay, so let me share my screen. I just put together a couple of rough slides to help keep me organized. I can get a little bit passionate about this, so it's good to have an overarching structure. So we're focused on early career negotiation strategy. Candidly, the conversation might not be all that different if we were talking solely to undergraduates or solely to executives. A lot of what we're addressing generalizes across all of those contexts, but we are focusing on, there are some things that we can rule out based on where you all are right now in your lives and your careers. So very much focused on who you are and what you're doing. And that means that some of the mindset you might bring to this endeavor might be different than, I guess, what you might assume. So I want you, in your own head, sort of think about you're interviewing and Molly from Deloitte calls and says, hey, we'd like to make you an offer. Think about how you would describe that. Think about what you are preparing for. And since I can see a bunch of people, can y'all throw some adjectives at me? What is it that you're going to be doing? Is this a lovely conversation, like a walk in the park? Is this a battle to the finish? What do you imagine is happening?
Do you mean in the process of the interview or?
No, in the negotiation itself.
Convincing.
Convincing. Okay.
Making
What
the-
else?
Leveling.
Leveling. Okay.
Charming.
Okay.
David in the chat says uncomfortable.
Okay. Thank you, Shona. So it's all about the push. It's like trying to convince them, charm them, influence them. And sometimes it feels a little tension. That's what we typically think of. And I need you to change your mindset. I need you to like, let that all go. Because what this conversation is about you needing to learn so that you can explore the space, explore and build this relationship so that you are able to generate and feel comfortable with employment terms that will support you going forward. So the words that I use to describe this relationship are these, right? So we are exploring, we're collaborating, we're problem solving, we're level setting too. So we're thinking about constraints. It's about a relationship. It's about creativity as opposed to this like tension or conflict. It's important, so incredibly important that you are likable, that there's a mutual respect, and that we're thinking about a variety of opportunities. So this is not a battle to be won. You don't need to convince them. They should be convincing you as much as you are, but you don't even know what you're trying to convince them of because you don't know everything you need to negotiate this right now. It is not a battle to be won. It's not a zero-sum game, and it is not something that you can do effectively right now with only the information that you have in your own head. These ideas are all myths. Instead, I would encourage you to sort of change the mindset to one where this is a conversation where they really want to like and respect you because they want to work. They're a headhunter. They want you to say yes because their employer wants you. So they want to like and respect you. They might not have all of the answers yet. They have priorities and constraints like we all do. They cannot read your mind. And ultimately, they want you to say yes, and they want you to be successful in this role because at your stage in your careers, you are so expensive to hire and you're even more expensive to lose. They want you to say yes if it's a mutually agreed fit, and they want you to be successful. So that tension that you might feel, it's natural, it's so natural, but it's exacerbated if you're like, I need to convince them of these things. I need to convince them of my value. I need to convince them to pay me more. You may or may not be able to do those things, but what you absolutely need to do is to build this relationship, to explore things that you may already anticipate and things that you haven't yet identified, and communicate, all within the scope of how do I generate the resources to be most successful in this role?
Professor Kern, there's a question in the chat. Fabiana asks, why are we expensive to lose?
Oh, because basically at your level, the amount of, so for example, I have a client right now who they have lost someone, and to have someone fill that role, it will probably take them, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks to find the right person. And in those 6 to 8 weeks, for example, they will hire a consultant. The consultant charges $50,000 a week. So to fill in the gap of this role, which is a mid-level manager kind of role, they will spend, I don't know, $300,000 because it's urgent, because it's a specific skill set, because they need it. They need it. They can't work without it. If you didn't have those resources, right? So this particular client has resources to throw around. If you didn't though, let's say it's your peer who has to fill in for you. Well, taking on, as many as you have probably experienced, taking on the responsibilities of 2 roles is incredibly challenging. right? And so you've got burnout and dissatisfaction and all sorts of other psychological variables at stake that, there's no bonus that can make up for that, right? Because someone is being taken advantage of, or just overly burdened, and the consequences are real. So the cost it takes to hire you can be as little as a LinkedIn ad or as much as a headhunter and paying them either a flat fee or 30% of your salary. But the cost to lose you is, again, that same cost to hire, plus all of the work, all of the productivity, all of the cohesion within the team that they have lost and now have to take time to rebuild. So losing employees is the biggest cost to organizations. So they need you. They want you to be successful. They don't want to waste time with someone who's not going to be a good fit. Which makes this really a lovely conversation, because you're trying to assess, even through the negotiation, if this is the right fit for you. Because one thing that doesn't come up very often, but I have seen it enough times to mention it, that although the interviews are done and they've extended an offer, some employers use the negotiation process as another form of assessment, another way to evaluate if you are a good fit. Some roles clearly have negotiation as part of the skill set that's necessary. Others want to know more about your motivations, and the best way to learn about your motivations is to see what you prioritize in these conversations. And so they're evaluating you still and deciding, in some cases, even if they want to continue the conversation. So it's a conversation. You're still learning. You're still very much focused on the relationship, and no one wants it to result in something that won't allow you to be successful. So then the question becomes, so if you approach this from a learning mindset, if you will, then what do we need to be thinking about? And as I said, there are more resources, more articles, more TED Talks, more things to consider on the internet than I could possibly list. And one of the assignments that I have my negotiation students do is they go and look at some of those things and say, well, what have I learned from that? What is meaningful to share with my class, our class? But there are so many different things. I encourage you to read some of that, right? Because it's the first thing that any negotiator needs to do, but particularly for a negotiation that's so important to you, is prepare. You can't go in blind or cold. You've got to spend a decent amount of time. And when I said I do a lot of consulting, I do a lot of negotiation training, but a lot of my individual work is helping people plan for these negotiations, because it establishes, their comfort having the conversation to get rid of some of that tension, but also coming up with a strategy about how to engage. So you want to be prepared, and some of the things that you can do to read. So one of my close friends does a lot of little short videos. He's got a bunch of articles in Harvard Business Review. His name is Deepak Malhotra. I think his video, so he teaches at Harvard, and his video of his job negotiation seminar, which he does, I think, every year still, it's an hour and something long, easily accessible on the internet. Read things like that, just to get yourself in the headspace of, what should I be thinking about? These are the things that I want you to think about. So in your preparations, the first thing I need you to think about is your plan B. So if you are negotiating with me and this negotiation does not result in you saying yes, what are you going to do next? So for example, and I keep using Deloitte because it's so natural to me, and I need to say, I loved working at Deloitte. So please, this should be good promotion for them. So you're interviewing with me for Deloitte, and you need to identify what's your plan B. Well, it might be staying in grad school, maybe going full-time to finish your MBA, if you're not doing that already, or continuing to do that. It might be another job offer. Is that job offer from Bain, or is it from McDonald's? And if it's from McDonald's, is it in the management development program, or is it flipping burgers? But what is your plan B? Critically, we have this anecdote, or this layperson's way of saying the rule of three. In everything except for serious relationships, you need three alternatives. So I want you, when you are looking for jobs and you get your first job offer, you don't stop there. Keep working all of your different angles to try to generate 2 more offers, at least. And if it's not to the offer stage yet, but you're exploring different opportunities, like, should I apply to this? Should I apply to this? I want you to apply to as many opportunities as you can manage, because there is power in your alternatives, in your plan B. There's so much power. There's power in the confidence that it gives you, because you know what you're going to do if this conversation doesn't work out. There is power how it allows you to be perceived by the potential employer. Because if you were negotiating with me at Deloitte and you said, Molly, I'm so excited about this, but I'm trying to work through, for example, tuition reimbursement. I have another offer and they provide tuition reimbursement. Does Deloitte? Well, tell me more about this other offer. Oh, well, it's with McKinsey. And, okay, so, oh, wow, McKinsey, that's pretty great. Like, what were you hoping to do? Like, what are you planning to do there? What's the role there? It's a consulting function. So all of a sudden the conversation gets richer and it brings a lot more variables onto the table that we can talk about. So your plan B, it tells you what's going to happen if this negotiation doesn't go as planned, right? And it allows you a tool to begin to assess, well, what do I like about what I am negotiating and how it compares to my other options? So you need to know this critical, we often refer to it as your BATNA, but your plan B, what happens if this doesn't go through? And try to have 3.
How do you go about ensuring that your plan Bs are realistic?
They don't have to be. You want them to be as actionable as possible. So they could be, for example, if you're interviewing for a job and you're talking to me as the potential employer, it could be, okay, well, if this doesn't work out, then I'm just going to keep interviewing. And how does that feel? What does that mean for me? Right? It could be, well, I did get that other offer. It's not as good as this one, but it's better than continuing to look. Or it's the status quo. I won't be employed for a period of time. So it doesn't have to be, it's not about realism necessarily. It's more about actionable. What is it that you will actually do if we have a conversation and it doesn't work out? So that's the first thing that you need to do. Like, what is if this falls through, what's going to happen? So I'm thinking about a conversation I had earlier this week where someone said, Professor, if I don't get this job, I can't work anywhere. Like, I need this job. Like, well, the way that they were describing the job was like, well, that job exists, that role exists in a lot of places. Like, why do you need this job in this company? And they said, well, because they do this. And this that they were doing, and I apologize for the lack of specifics, but to keep their identity anonymous, this, it didn't seem all that unique to me. It's like, well, couldn't you do that at another firm, like this one, for example? And, oh, I don't know. So they were so locked into this idea that I have to work for this particular organization in this particular role, and that if they didn't know how they were going to continue. It's like, well, this role exists other places. Have you explored those? And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, okay, well, how do I do that? Or what, so go look and see if they have any jobs posted. Look at the job description on Glassdoor or LinkedIn and see if they're comparable and where there are differences and where there are similarities. But, you don't want to it's important to be able to work towards your goals, but you don't want to limit yourself. I think this is the only way to get there. So if there are other ways, start exploring those. Danlu?
Yes, hi. So I have a question that, is there any difference between the plan B and the BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiation agreement?
No, they are the same thing. So your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, is the academic way to say your plan B.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So you know what your fallback position is. External to this negotiation, first and foremost, it gives you a sense of confidence and comfort, and it might be used in your negotiation with the other side. Second thing that I would like you to do is to do some research. And there's no way to capture all of the things that you could possibly be talking about. So this is just a short list. But when I say do your research, what I mean is exhaustive, comprehensive research. So if it's GCMC or STAR, if you're an undergrad, Glassdoor, ONET, which lists like every job description within at least the United States and salary ranges, areas, etc. Talk to classmates, talk to alum who work in the organization, look on LinkedIn, look at competitors. So if you were negotiating with Deloitte, I hope that you are looking at E&Y and Price Waterhouse. Like, you should be looking everywhere to get as comprehensive and realistic an understanding of what you should be talking about in this conversation and where your value is in this conversation. So you're thinking about your responsibilities and whether it's managing a team of a particular size or specific projects or industries or technological expertise or any particular competency. Like, what is it that they want you for? Salary, are there bands? Is there a really formal HR structure where at particular titles, your salary is banded? In New York, fortunately, in just a couple of months, that information will be shared with us as part of the process. But it's beyond the salary right now. It's also, well, how is that going to change over time? So what is the typical raise, if there is one? Are there any contractual elements to this? So as a professor in CUNY, our salaries are very much contractually defined. So does that exist within your environment? So when we're thinking about salary, it's not just the number, right? It's also how it can change and what the constraints and opportunities might be with regards to it. Same thing with bonuses, if there are bonuses, or equity or stock options. What is it based on? Sorry about the typo. Is it firm, team, or individual performance? How often are they paid? Who decides? Who establishes the goals? So I have a lot of questions here, right? You should too. These are the types of things that you want to be exploring with the potential employer to understand the nuance to what might be in an offer letter. Your salary will be X with a bonus of X, right? You want to understand not just what that is, but how it is situated within their HR, their performance management system, as well as over time. Your title, what does that reflect within the organization? Benefits, do you need all the benefits that they provide? The structure of how you fit within this team or this organization. These are all of the things, some of all of the things that you probably will never learn from an offer letter, or from, even worse, an email that says, hey, we'd like to make you an offer. How about this? But these are the places where you get a better sense of what might be possible in your negotiation. And so, for example, I'm going to share a few stories with you today from graduates from the MBA program. And one was about benefits. And this person, I just recently graduated and accepted a role on the West Coast and was freaking out about the negotiation because it's Silicon Valley and it's expensive to live there. So New York is not inexpensive, but Silicon Valley is comparable, or if not even more expensive. And so had this negotiation, felt pretty good about it, except realized that they would need a car. So in New York, cars really aren't necessary. And, was balancing a lot of different things, thinking about, well, I have to pay back all of my student loans, and I want to be able to do this in order to afford my apartment, and blah, 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 blah. All of these things were going around in their head. And all of a sudden, I need to buy a car. How am I going to do? So got a little bit more competitive in the negotiation and started pushing really hard on a particular salary, Fortunately, the employer was not offended by this and didn't say, didn't react to the competitive nature. So the now alum, former student, said that they were getting a little bit anxious, right? And they're like, I can't accept that salary because there's no way I can live on that with an apartment and a car, et cetera, et cetera. But the employer picked up on the tension. And they said, tell me what your concerns are. So our salaries are very competitive within the industry. And, even based on our earlier conversation, it felt like, we had come to a good understanding there. So what's going on in your head? What's of concern to you? And the new employee, or potential new employee, said, I don't know how I'm supposed to do this, have a car, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the employer's like, oh, didn't we tell you? You get a car. You get a car allowance. Everyone gets it. And I forget what it was. It was like a BMW. It was a nice car. But oh, I didn't tell you about that? Oh, yeah, you get a car. Don't worry about it. And all of a sudden, everything was done. Oh, right. But there was tension there. And there was stress. And there was a little bit more competition and confrontation because of this lack of understanding or lack of knowledge. It was a lot of times organizations have some either wonderfully amazing benefits or very few or somewhere in between, but we don't talk about them because we're like, oh, they're just the perks or they're the benefits, they're standard. Well, how we understand what is standard varies quite a bit. So even something as simple as a standard benefits package, I would encourage you to try to understand it better. And it's not uncommon for the person you're speaking with to not really understand it all, but they usually, could I speak to an HR professional? Right? So someone within the organization who could explain it better. Personally, here in CUNY, I get medical benefits that I don't need to use. And so I learned through a conversation similar to what I'm describing here, that if I declined those benefits, I would get a certain sum of money instead. If you don't ask for that sum of money, you don't get it. They don't automatically give it to you. You have to ask for it. So again, I could have, for the last, 18 years, I would have missed that benefit had I not had that conversation. So that's what I mean. It's a conversation so you can learn. And when you're learning, you're not just learning to inform this negotiation, you're learning about what your role will look like within this organization. Do they have formal HR processes? Is performance management, are raises, very structured, or are they more based on what your manager thinks and they have a wide range to work within? Do titles mean a lot? Or in some industries, they mean a whole lot. In others, it's okay, you're being promoted. We'll put an associate on your name. But that's what we're trying to understand. And when you work through this, then the next thing I want you to do is to think about how important each of these things is relative to the others. So for you, is it that, you need the salary, period? That is the most important thing to you and everything else is just way down? Or is it the responsibilities, the opportunity to work with a particular person on a particular team, on a particular project? And frankly, if you could get that role on that industry, for example, salary would be much less meaningful. Is there, for you, is salary more important than bonus? Bonus more important than salary? I try not to assume anything for any one person. So what we're trying to do is in our own heads, okay, what really is most important to me, knowing that not everything can be equally important, and then rank ordering across, right? So I don't actually have to use my benefits here because I have a spouse whose benefits we use. So for me on this list, it would be, the responsibilities, salary, and then way down low would be the benefits. So start thinking about that, because a lot of times the mindset that we bring to this conversation is, okay, I need my salary and I need to be really, really high. Or I need this title because this is going to allow me to skip to the next level in the next role that I envision. Start differentiating across. And it takes, sometimes it's not something you'll know right away, but when you're having the conversations with all the different people and you're doing your research, it might become more apparent to you. Oh, wow, I never really thought that the ability to work with this person would be so much more meaningful to me than $10,000 in a salary.
Professor Kern, we have a question in the chat. about Plan B, or two questions. Fabiana asks, when is the right time to bring up Plan B? Is it the first interview, midway, final round, or after the final offer? And the
Okay.
second question is, how much information should I offer about Plan B?
Okay.
Should you share the names of the companies and the titles, etc.?
Got it. Okay, so industry does play a role in this. So you would want to know what is typical, traditional in the space that you're interviewing and negotiating. But generally, you would not share your Plan B unless you had to. And what I mean is, this whole conversation is about building a relationship. And no one wants to know that their competitor is like, sitting on your shoulder, like helping you evaluate all of this. They don't want to be thinking about their competition when they're in this conversation. They want to have a conversation so that you can be successful in this role. They don't want to be thinking, well, if this doesn't measure up, they're going to go to the next person. So front of mind, it has to be the two of you having this conversation with no one else, no other alternatives in the conversation. However, if you, there are a couple of caveats to that. So one, if they make you an offer and they say, we don't negotiate, and from your research, your BATNA provides other sources of value to you. So, it's whether it's promotion or it's a sabbatical or, who knows, but like, so the employer extends an offer and they say, we don't negotiate, but there are things that are attractive to you in your alternative, then that would be a time when I would say, listen, I appreciate that you have a policy of not negotiating, but I'm evaluating, and I really like this role. And I see that, employer B has a sabbatical. Sorry about that. I think my Zoom, it's been glitchy today. Apologies. So if they won't engage in the negotiation, that might be a time that you share your Plan B to get them to engage in the conversation. The second time that you might share your Plan B is if you're nearing the end of the negotiation, like you've gotten pretty much everything finalized, but they're holding out on something that's important to you, not something that's unimportant, but something that's important to you. So if it's works through everything and it's a title, or it's a $10,000 difference in salary, and it is meaningful to you, that might be a time that I would share my Plan B. And the Plan B there would be, it would probably be fairly detailed, right? Like I have another, I'm so appreciative of this opportunity. I think I could be really successful and contribute a lot to your team. As you know, I've been interviewing with others, and I do have an offer from a competitor. They've offered me, $10,000 more. Is there any way that you can match that? And then I would be happy to say yes, right? So it's not, can you match that? Oh, and can you do this too, and this too, this too? It's your last ask, and it's grounded in I have this competitive offer. I want to say yes to you. Can you match it? That would be a time to share your Plan B, the second time. And then the third time that you might share your Plan B is if you need to come in really strong. And candidly, I would not advise this generally, but if you need to get their attention, so there's urgency, there is, I guess that's probably the number one reason. If there's urgency, right? Listen, I want to work with you. I'd love to work through this. I have this other offer. Is it something that we can discuss? And here's an example. So a former student was interviewing, I think was with 3 different organizations, also was currently employed full-time. So that was potentially the BATNA to stay where they were. But one of the organizations, they were just very excited to work with and started having the conversation. And they were, they were communicating that they were interested in this person, but they had very clear limitations and constraints, which a lot of organizations do around salary and bonuses and title and whatnot. And so they had this conversation, and the student said, listen, I see what your organization is trying to do. I would love to be a part of it, but candidly, I've got an offer from your competitor, and it was, I think it was like 50% more in terms of salary, which yes, like eyebrows could go up, but like there was variation. And they said, listen, we can't do that. So she had to share it, but she shared it knowing that it might result in a no. So there's a risk to flaunting your plan B because it can close the conversation quite rapidly. And if it doesn't end the conversation, it will likely put this more urgency around it, which doesn't facilitate creativity. It's more of a competitive nature. So generally, I would share a plan B if I was going to share it at all towards the end of a negotiation, or if they weren't engaging in the act of negotiating back and forth. But some will share it early to just to entice, I guess, is a good, like, if you want me, you're going to have to match this kind of thing. Not my personal go-to because of the downsides, the competition, the risk of them saying, okay, I can't match that, and the like. But consider, and you can be as detailed as you would like. One of my own experiences, a candidate told me that they had an offer, and I found out that they didn't. So they were very detailed. They said, I have an offer from this employer, and they're offering me, a certain amount, a lot more than what you're offering. And, to me, I was like, okay, so it was the approach, like, let me flaunt my power to see what that does. And I was like, it did encourage, like, well, like, are these the right salaries? And are we competitive in the market? So we were responding as the recruit had hoped. But then I found out that they were lying, because we find out these things. The world is small. So like, if you are going to share the details, make sure they're true, and just, think about what you're trying to motivate by sharing those details. And in your preparation, so you've got your plan B and you're starting to think about how to use it. You're doing your research to better learn, like, what you can expect in this role and what you can expect the employer might offer. And then I want you to practice asking and answering tough, unexpected questions. Practice hearing the word no and not getting distressed, right? Because one of the first reactions, I said, like, what do you think about when you describe these negotiations? There's tension. Well, you're going to hear the word no. It's unlikely that they're just going to yes, yes, yes. So I need you to just get past that and put both, like, literally how you see it sit. So ground yourself, put both feet on the ground, and get prepared for a conversation where not everything is going to go your way, but the motivation is, again, to create a situation where you will be successful in this role. So practice asking for what you want. So whether if you're fairly introverted and rather do this on your own, look in the mirror, look in your camera and video yourself doing it. But ask, like, get yourself ready to answer the question, how much do you expect to earn, right? How much are you looking for? When can you start? Are you comfortable with the salary of this? Imagine it's really low or really high, right? But get the words out so the first time you are saying these things is not in the conversation. And if you are comfortable sort of like role playing this with a friend or a family member, do that. Have them be tough, have them be friendly, have them try a lot of different perspectives so that you can get really comfortable talking about the value that you bring and what's important to you.
Professor Kern, I wonder if you could give us an example of how to respond to one of those questions. Like, suppose you get a very low number. Would you be comfortable with $2 and an iced coffee? So.
Right. Well, so you might actually laugh, right? Like, if it was that absurd, you might laugh and be like, okay, we might be talking about different things. What I would do beyond that, though, so more realistically, I might say, wow, that's a lot lower than what I was looking for. Can you tell me more, though, about what your expectations are? Tell me more about, are there bonuses? Are there additional benefits that I might need to think about. Like I know some employers have, and this is where your research comes in. I've seen some employers have sabbaticals. Is there something like that here? Or actually a negotiation that I consulted on last week, there was this tremendous educational benefit that, when you looked and saw all of the details, there was no fine print. Like you could literally like go to med school and they would pay for it. So, like maybe there's something like that. So while the salary might be really, really low, there might be something else that would bring value to you. This is your opportunity to ask about that. And so I was, when I was interviewing for the job at Baruch, an employer, a college said, we would love to have you here, but we have to tell you the salary will be $40,000. And I was like, $40,000? I was like, that's really, really low. I said, yes, but this is what you will get with that. And they talked all about the culture and about the research productivity and about the wonderful students. And I took all that information. I said, I really appreciate your being candid about this. And I, took down all of my notes. And then when I was looking at my other options, I was looking at salary, I was looking at the quality of the students. That's why I'm here. I was looking at the research culture, like all of those things, and making sure that something that would have brought value in one place, I can also get somewhere else. So you can laugh and be like, oh my goodness. Or you can say, wow, that's a lot lower than, what I was thinking we were at. But tell me more about how it's structured in terms of the compensation, in terms of the responsibilities, the timing, etc. If it's, and the same thing would actually be true if it was really, really high. So if they said, salary is $40,000, or they said the salary is $400,000, assuming those are both sort of outliers, you would want to ask the same questions. But I want you, ideally, you would have a support group. You would have a group of classmates or friends or family members who you could reach out to practice asking and answering these questions, to get a sense of, hey, these are the things that I'm thinking about in terms of this role. Is there something that you would see? So like the intuitive things are like, oh, salary, maybe bonuses, but would you have thought about negotiating your responsibilities or the additional headcount that you might need to do what they want you to do? Or looking at whether there's a car as part of the benefit structure, right? So having someone who you feel comfortable reaching out to work through some of these things is so impactful, because what happens is you get in your own head and you start negotiating against yourself before you've even had a conversation. And that's the last thing that you should do, right? You only have, so this is a context of asymmetric information. You only know so much. So you should not be rationalizing, oh, I can't ask for that, or oh, I can't consider that, because you only have a subset of the information. So in your preparation, it's okay, what information do I have? What information do I need to learn? And thinking about how I'm reacting to that. And during the negotiation, I'm going to start with the first one. Sit comfortably, get comfortable. Like I remember so many recruits, they would be really rigid and they'd often be looking down. And yeah, that was pretty much it. Like it was hard for them to make eye contact and they looked really stiff. In contrast, if someone could look you in the eye, sit sort of comfortably relaxed, even if they weren't actually relaxed, but it conveyed to me, the interviewer, that they were like really trying to have this conversation. But beyond that, it also affected how they are able to process information. So just be aware, like I like to say, put both feet on the ground so that you are literally grounded, but just get comfortable in your space, your physical space, so that whether or in person, that comfort, or rather the discomfort, won't translate into tension in the conversation. After you're seated comfortably and you're hydrated, right? Like just get your physical self in its best position. Then this negotiation is about learning. So all of those things that you've identified in your preparation, all the questions that you're curious about, it's an opportunity to ask. And sometimes you might, if it's a conversation that is scheduled, a couple of days in the future, You might send a quick email saying, I'm so excited to talk about this with you. I have a few questions that I don't know if you'll be able to answer them or not. Maybe it's about benefits, maybe it's about other perks or start dates or location, but I wanted to just share them with you in case I needed to talk to someone else or you needed to put me in touch with someone. Right, so identify the questions that will help you at least begin this conversation. And then refrain from, like, I'm looking at, like, you have your list of questions, don't just like go through in order, like ask a question and then listen to the answer and try to integrate it into your understanding. Because what you're trying to do here is to identify opportunities and constraints. You're trying to understand what is possible in this opportunity, in this context, and what might not be possible. So you have to listen, you have to be able to process. If you're like stuck in the looking at your list, like, okay, I have to ask this and I have to ask this and this and this, it's not going to do you any good and it might actually hurt you. So this is an opportunity to learn, slow down, have a conversation. It is not, if you have 10 questions, this is not a 5-minute conversation. If you have 10 questions, it's probably too many. But if you have, let's say, like 5 questions, you're probably going to need about 20 to 30 minutes. So make sure that you've scheduled that and that you're not feeling rushed. So the overarching goal is to learn. And after you've learned, then it's time to start talking about what the package might look like. I would encourage you not to focus linearly, like let's first talk about salary, then let's talk about title, and then let's talk about bonus. Try to put it all together. What we're looking for is opportunities to trade off across things. So perhaps they can increase, they can only increase your salary if they increase your title, which you might not be ready for quite yet, but they can have a fast track conversation in 6 months and see how you're doing. And if at that point you're meeting the expectations of someone in that role, then that title and salary might be possible. So capturing things as they relate to each other as opposed to checklist kind of negotiation. And let the little things go. So a recruit that will never leave my memory negotiated for days. And the very last thing we were negotiating was the reimbursement of a cell phone. You wouldn't want the possibility of getting your cell phone bill reimbursed jeopardize the rest of the negotiation. To know when to just let it go. Like when things are good enough, when they're good rather, like, okay, we don't need to talk about the cell phone, right? Or you could say, like, is there any sort of like discount, corporate discount at AT&T or whatever your cell phone is, right? Like you could ask that, but you wouldn't want to keep pushing on, well, I want my cell phone reimbursed, right? So know when it's good. Because again, it's a relationship and you don't want to end the conversation with you, pestering them about something as minor as a cell phone. So think about how you're putting all this together and what you're really trying to get and why. Then you've got to be likable. Like I can't say it more clearly than that. For them to want to negotiate with you, to advocate for you, to get more information for you, it is so much easier to say yes to those requests if we like you. And if I'm going to be working with you in the future in any capacity, even if it's just in the same building. So as a recruiter, I wasn't necessarily working with the consultants, but we were in the same space. And you would go to the ends of the earth to help someone that you liked. But if they didn't pay attention to you as a human, but more like you are the instrument for me to get into this firm, it's just not worth the effort. So take the time, like that's why this is all about learning and conversation, because if it's just learning, then it's very easy to be likable because you're curious about how this organization operates and how you can be most effective and contribute the most to it. And when your future supervisors are like, oh, wow, they're asking great questions and they're causing me to think about things I never really thought about, I'm going to go learn more. I'm going to see if this is possible. And I'm going to end with a story that speaks to this and speaks to the after too. So the after, I want you to reflect upon what has happened and add it to your knowledge base and always express gratitude. But here's the story for you. So another student had this unbelievable job offer, like absolutely glorious. Talked to the potential manager and was just so excited to do this work, but learned that the culture was very formal and they work from 9 to 6, period. And the student had a personal commitment or a goal that was really important to them, where they were hoping to take advantage of some flexibility. And they needed a little bit of time, a couple of days a week in the middle of the day. And the employer was like, no, you need to be here 9 to 5. FaceTime is absolutely critical. And so many people would say, okay, well, either I give up something that's really important to me and accept this amazing job offer, or I let the amazing job offer go and find something that I can sustain my important personal commitment. Well, one of your classmates or alum didn't do that. Instead, they said, they went back, they sort of slept on it, which is always a good idea. Allow yourself some time to think and to percolate. And they said, after understanding, learning more about the role and about how the team worked, they went back to the manager and they said, listen, from what I understand, I appreciate the culture and the 9 to 5, but what I understand that we're doing is we're serving markets that are around the globe. And I'm sort of curious because I see how we can cover North and South America and Europe, but what do we do about Asia, right? Because Asia is not from 9 to 5. And the manager said, well, we haven't been able to serve that market very well because there's no one here. And so the student said, I would love to help us grow in that area. But in exchange, I would like to be able to work from home 2 days a week so that I can, I don't think she even shared the reason why, but I will work from basically like 9 to 9 several days, or I can work from 9 to 5. And then on the days that I'm working from home, work from noon to 9 or something like that. She gave him a couple of options. She said, what do you think? And the manager was sort of floored because they had never thought about a way to address that need. And then that whole idea of FaceTime from 9 to 5, it's like, that is no longer important. We need you here sometimes, but if you can help us with that and grow our group in that way, it's done. It just took a little bit of creativity and the courage to ask the question based on the understanding that they gleaned from this conversation. She said yes. I want you to know, though, that so she went to sleep on it, but before she left, because it was clear to her that the manager thought this was a deal breaker, because he saw in her eyes how clearly disappointed she was. And she said, I expressed my pure gratitude for the opportunity to learn more about this and how much I really would love to do this, and asked, like a lot of us would do, like, can I sleep on it? Right? Can I get back to you tomorrow? The manager thought this was a clear no. So the gratitude, it was like, well, he was sort of surprised when she called back the next day with this. But that gratitude allowed for that relationship to keep going. It wasn't like they didn't end it the night before on disappointment. It was like, okay, we had a good conversation. We tried and we understand what our constraints are and why, and I'll respect whatever decision you make. So that's really important. Similarly, what she learned about 9 to 5 and what that means, she learned for herself that was a deal breaker. And so in her head, because we talked that night, she said, listen, if this isn't going to work, then I am going to look for another place where my number one priority is flexibility in the schedule. So it's not just negotiating your early career, any career salary compensation packages is not about just that one moment. It's what you're negotiating for that will serve as a foundation going forward, both potentially with this employer, but also in terms of potential opportunities. If you handle this well, having a conversational learning kind of sit down, essentially, it might not result in a yes today. But my very last point is another student, former student, ended in a no. It wasn't going to work. The constraints were too much. But the employer reached back out to them, maybe like a year later, and said, listen, you made an impression on us. We have a new role, new opportunity. It's at this level. What do you think? And because they had the pre-existing relationship, because she knew about everything about this, and basically they had created a role for her, it was an easy yes. So it's not just today that you're negotiating, it's the role as it grows, its potential future opportunities. And again, let me just remind you, they want you to be successful. They're not out to get you. And they will have constraints, and this is your opportunity to learn what those are and to navigate within them. I am happy to stay for as long as y'all have questions. So do you have additional questions?
Thank you, Professor Kern. There's one question here in the chat. We're not going to take too much of your time. It says, I have found challenging that in 30-minute interviews that after covering the background, the details of the role and expectations, there's realistically only 2 to 5 minutes to ask a question or two. So what questions are critical?
So during the interview, I would not be concerned about the negotiation. The interview is your opportunity to sell yourself. So the questions that you should be asking in the interview are the ones that allow you to shine, right? So I would not be worrying about the negotiation during the interview at all. Ask the good questions so that they know that you're paying attention to things like their culture and how you will be a good fit and how your skill set will create incredible value for their organization. This conversation is after you've received that offer.
Okay, great. Here's another question from Ben Weinberg. Would you approach a negotiation for an internal transfer the same way?
Yes. And what I would be particularly aware of is that when we are transitioning internally, we tend to assume that we know a lot of the answers to our questions. I would treat it as if I was exploring a totally different organization, because every division, every team has their own norms. Every supervisor has their own personalities and styles in terms of how far they will go to support you, how generous they are, how conservative they are. So I would approach it in very much the same way in terms of learning about this opportunity. And it may be even more so because you don't want to jeopardize any other relationships internally.
Here's one that was submitted earlier. A lot of people have side hustles or side pursuits in addition to their full-time jobs. How do you approach attempting to build, I guess, your brand separately from your employer without incurring the wrath of the employer or having them think that you're not focused on the job adequately?
Okay, so first make sure that it's contractually okay. So for in union environments, there are often limitations as to what would be acceptable. So I would know what you're contractually obligated to do or not do. But then I think that depends on your relationship with your manager, whoever you are reporting to. If actually a lot of you here have side gigs that take a whole lot of time. So if that's not an issue, if that's not an issue for that person, then it's very easy. If it is an issue, then it's sensitive. I would want to know what my BATNA is. And I think, so a lot of what people will say or do is that their side hustles are private and they're not shared. If it's interfering with your work, then that is a legitimate problem. And then you should be exploring potentially other ways to pursue your interests. But if it's not interfering with your work and it's simply about how do I structure this so that I can do this and this, then I would be looking for ways that you are providing value, much like that former student, providing value to your supervisor so that they're willing to be flexible. And a lot of you actually in the part-time program, so we were talking about the negotiation class, and I've offered it, so usually it's online, but sometimes it's during the day. And it was always interesting to me to see students who are working full time find time to come, like it's usually like at 12:30 on a Monday, like to find time in the middle of the day to come to class. And what I remember one student saying was, well, my supervisor wants me to be able to negotiate. The more I can do this, the better that our team is. And so, they were very happy to say, take a longer lunch, go learn how to negotiate, and then bring back what you've learned from class to us, and we'll talk about it. So it was that lovely, I mean, it's really elegant, right? Like finding the way that what I'm trying to do as my side gig or in this class school will benefit my employer, and influencing them to see that so that they're willing to support me in what I need.
Thank you very much, Professor Kern. Thank you to everyone who attended this event for the Zicklin MBA Club. If you are interested in upcoming events, please visit our link tree, which is in the chat. If you would like to hear more Professor Kern's wisdom about negotiating with kids, you can purchase our book from your local bookseller or Amazon.com.
Thank you for the pitch. Thank you all. And just use each other as resources in these negotiations. You got this. It's just a conversation, and you have all talked my ear off as well as each other's. So just have a lovely conversation and learn and support each other in learning so that you can share all that insight and have fun with it. And then always reach out if you need help.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
y'all.
Good night, everyone.